Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the National Review Institute's Economic Freedom Regional Seminar, which we're putting on here this afternoon. Before I do anything else, let me thank Harlan and Kathy Crow for having us at this wonderful place. It's really this building, the whole campus, everything Harlan does is an architectural love letter to what's best in America. And it's just such an amazing place, and there are just so many things that are so incredible. So I wanted to log on to the Wi-Fi a little earlier and find a little private spot to make some notes. So I went upstairs, found a room, went to the corner, and saw a very old chair. I was like, I'll just sit here for a second. I was like, wait a minute, I better not sit in this chair. This may have been, John Jay's chair while he was drafting his parts of the Federalist Papers or something like that. And if you'll allow me just to stay on Harlan for just one moment, Clarence Thomas, a couple weeks ago in Austin, gave one of the best speeches on the Declaration of Independence since Calvin Coolidge gave his historic address on the Declaration. And what did the left focus on? The left focused on the fact that Justice Thomas recognized Harlan and his friendship from the podium. So there are a lot of low and dishonest things in our public life at the moment, but I'll never cease to think it is a total disgrace that some people persist in trying to make a genuine and sincere friendship between two of the most lovely people in the United States of America, Harlan and Justice Thomas, into a scandal. It is disgusting. So with that, we're going to talk about economic freedom this afternoon. I've got that off my chest. So this is a cause that means a lot to National Review, and it may mean more to us than ever before, because through no fault of our own, National Review is now headquartered in communist-occupied territory. And we didn't have to move to Havana to do it. We didn't have to move to Beijing to do it. We just needed to stay in New York City when Zoran Mamdani took over. And it's kind of amazing to think about it. It could be before Donald Trump is said and done, Havana, speaking of Havana may be pursuing more free market policies than New York City. So we're all aware of this amazing and very propitious coincidence that birth of America, Declaration of Independence, 1776, same year of the publication of the Great Wealth of Nations, right? And this has been a commercial-oriented society literally from the very beginning. The very foundation of America, or the foundation of the settlement of this continent by English-speaking peoples. What was it? The Virginia Company. What was the Virginia Company? It was a joint stock company. Now, most of life is based on zero-sum transactions, right? You look at international affairs. Either Germany or France is going to occupy Alsace-Lorraine, right? And one of them is going to be very upset at the other if they're not the one occupying it. Thomas Friedman's going to win a Pulitzer Prize, and I'm not, right? This is the way it goes. But the market is based on non-zero transactions. Or as James Tellerico might say, the market is non-binary, right? Because everyone benefits from market transactions. Things over time become cheaper and more widely available. Edison, at the very dawn of the age of electricity, said, we are going to make electricity so inexpensive and widely available that only the wealthy are going to use candles. And he was right. And the market has proved again and again its superiority to socialism. We all know the Churchill axiom that socialism is the sharing of miseries. There's another Churchill story I like, maybe apocryphal, but we don't need to examine it too closely. He apparently was going to the restroom off of Parliament one day, and Clement Attlee, an adversary of his, a socialist, was in there as well, and Churchill went way far away from himself, from Attlee when he was relieving himself, and Attlee says, awfully standoffish today, huh, Winston? And Churchill said, no, I just know whenever you see something large and well-functioning, you want to nationalize it, right? So this is why Churchill would never be seen in a men's room next to Bernie Sanders or Zoran Mamdani. But it doesn't matter how often socialism fails, it still persists. And this is because we live in a fallen world and error persists. And National Review is about combating error. We're going to combat some error here today, this afternoon. So what I'm going to do is recognize very briefly our sponsors who've helped us put on this event, and then introduce our first speaker this afternoon. So we'd like to thank and recognize the Apricity Foundation, Hayco Energy Group, Mr. John Bayless, Mr. and Mrs. Michael Brakey, Mr. Dale Brott and Mrs. Wendy Brott, Angel and Craig Fox, Mr. Brett Young, the Peter and Judy Kopsis Foundation. Please, let's give them all a round of applause for making this possible. So without further ado, we're going to hear from David Bahnsen. He is the founder and chief investment officer of the Bahnsen Group. He is routinely ranked and recognized as one of the top financial advisors in the United States. He has written many books. The most recent is called Full-Time: Work in the Meaning of Life, a brilliant, well-argued, and provocative work. Since we're among friends, I'll just let you in on one of my secrets. If you've ever heard me comment on any economic or financial matter, I'm just repeating what I heard David say, because I don't dare comment on such things without checking with David Bahnsen first. And we are all going to be blessed today to hear directly from the source. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Bahnsen.
Well, it is a very big honor to be here. I echo Rich's comments about the venue itself. It is always just a majestic experience to be here. I believe that the last time I was here on this stage, I was debating Orrin Cass sitting right there, and I just want to let you know that I won that debate. But I actually am here today to talk about the very same thing that I was here that night a couple years ago with Orrin, and that is this subject of free enterprise that we're here today to talk about. And the bulk of the time that I give public speeches on this subject, which is quite frequently, I might have a few notes, a few bullet points, but these are things that are near and dear to my heart that I can speak from pretty extemporaneously. And I chose to write out a speech today because I got really upset this morning and wanted to properly channel my emotions and my energy on this topic for you all today. And I thought I could organize my thoughts better by writing out the speech than otherwise. But as grateful as I am to be here, and as excited as I am to address you all on this topic, and as serious as I am about defending free enterprise through whatever years God gives me here on earth, I want to say that it is an honor to do so in partnership with the organization that is National Review. There are a lot of organizations that are committed to this cause. National Review is one that is near and dear to my heart for a reason I want to explain and quickly add modern context to. I am here today as a lover of freedom and markets, but I am here as a particular lover of National Review, of its history, its founder, its legacy, and its role in conserving the ideals that are worth conserving. If I had been alive in 1955, I would have loved it then. Throughout my childhood in the 1980s, I literally did love it and consume it vigorously. And throughout my young adult years in the 1990s and into this rather so far unsettling new century in which we find ourselves, I have loved National Review and her mission. But it is a very recent development that has me particularly animated and that has reignited my love of National Review and renewed the need for support. Socialism existed in American faculty lounges in the 1990s. Buckley attacked radicalism on campuses as far back as 1955. And we all know that the ethos of anti-communism was central to the history of National Review. But right now, we are not talking about socialist or communist. I am here today to partially address something that is associated with the right, with our own. A massive uprising on the right that is opposed to free markets, to turning terms like market fundamentalism into pejoratives, to making a case against free trade into a test of orthodoxy, People on the right believing that capital and labor are at diametrical odds with one another. The giants on whose shoulders we stand, yes, Meyer and Buckley and Chambers, but even apart from National Review, Hayek and Friedman, and going back to Adam Smith as well, they deserve a 2026 National Review that fights this new right temper tantrum with every ounce of breath in our collective bodies. This is why my gratitude for National Review has been renewed in recent years, because they have stood on principle when many have not, and I am positive that victory belongs to the truth tellers. The current debate over economic vision is not merely about policy preferences, tax rates, election cycles, or trade particulars. At the core of those who believe in free enterprise, who believe it is a core tenet of our nation's founding, who believe that what is at stake is crucial if we are to preserve not only the American experiment, but Western civilization, is this: a distinct view of the human person, of freedom, and of the kind of society that best allows people to flourish. Do we still believe that free people, acting with virtue and responsibility, are capable of building a good society without coercion? Because beneath the daily noise of politics, social media, beneath the headlines, the outrage, the chaos, there is a much more fundamental struggle underway, a struggle over the dignity of the human person and the future of freedom itself. Economic freedom is not merely an efficiency mechanism, and it never has been. It is not merely a system that produces more goods and services. It is not merely a way to maximize gross domestic product. It is, by the way, surely all of those things. It is just not only those things. Economic freedom is a moral necessity because the human person, created by God, possesses dignity, agency, creativity, and responsibility. And when a society forgets this, it does not merely become poorer, it becomes smaller, more cynical, and more dependent. It therefore possesses less character and less agency. And this is to say, it becomes less human. The great crisis of our time is not merely inflation, debt, regulation, political polarization, technological disruption. All of these things matter, but beneath them lies something even more dangerous: a growing loss of confidence in the moral capacity of free people. More and more, we are told that freedom is too risky, that ordinary people cannot be trusted, that experts must decide, bureaucrats must manage, central planners must be tasked with the role of allocating resources. These were the decisions and opinions and issues we fought against from the left for decades. Now we are being told it by the right. These authorities, we are told, will save us from uncertainty, inequality, and instability, from the failures of a market system. You know, that incredibly free and open and low-tax, low-regulation market we've all been living in. That's me being sarcastic. Yes, the Bernies and Warrens and AOCs and university professors who have never run a P&L tell us all these things. And most of these folks have said so for many years. They've been quite consistent, whether they be extreme statists or overconfident technocrats. But the urgency of my message today is not about the message we are countering, but the direction from which it is coming. The so-called New Right Economic Manifesto has accepted all of the underlying tenets of central planning, and the road to which this goes is not ambiguous or unclear. History teaches us something profound, that the greatest achievements of civilization have not and cannot come from centralized power. Our duty as lovers of freedom and believers in the God-given dignity of the human person is to promote unleashed creativity. Risk-taking and entrepreneurialism are indispensable to this, but so, my friends, is the allocation of capital. The demonization of the investor class has become crass and cynical and may be effective politically, but it is ideologically and practically insane. Those who claim to value family businesses and strong communities demonize capital formation and innovation to the peril of their own stated agenda. The moral, communitarian, and interpersonal character we want in our vision for society as conservatives is not threatened by free enterprise, but it is threatened by central planning. It is threatened by confiscation. It is threatened by the dulling of our senses and agency that comes with an unending creep of state power. The result is the stagnation that comes from subpar allocation of resources, from the centralization of decision-making that inevitably leads to uninformed decisions and flawed incentive structures. The right spent the second half of the 20th century claiming that bureaucrats create European stagnation, that committees cannot replicate what free people create voluntarily, that planners lack dispersed knowledge. We agreed about entrepreneurial imagination. We accurately said that the state cannot replace the moral energy that comes from human beings acting responsibly in freedom. And then 2008 happened. It has been my view for some time that 2008 represents a seminal moment in the history of economic thought for our era and our lifetimes, all of you here in this room. The right has never properly engaged the subject of 2008 and the global financial crisis that ensued. But what I am convinced historically happened in 2008, this pivotal and what I call seminal moment, not only in my life and my career, but in the world in which we are living, is that the efficiency argument of markets was allowed to be undermined, and we lacked the moral argument to replace it with. We now must restate these arguments to some of those who were once our own people, reframing markets as ecosystems of human action and demanding that the discussion center around a coherent view of the human person, an anthropology worthy of the conservative worldview. Every political philosophy contains an assumption about what human beings are. The defenders of economic freedom must never concede this argument. We are not defending markets because we worship money. We are defending markets because we believe people matter. The central planner sees populations, we see human beings. The planner sees units, we see souls. The planner sees problems to manage. We see human beings made for purpose, creativity, sacrifice, and contribution. Free markets do help to build wealth. They do lift people from poverty. They do extend life expectancy, reduce disease, expand opportunity, democratize consumption, and create prosperity on a scale previous generations could not imagine. Those are all necessary but insufficient claims. The new right and the old and new left suggest that they can produce similar outcomes with more control, with centrally managed efficiency, that if they can use their preferences to create their vision of fairness. If our only argument is material output, we will eventually lose to whoever promises enough comfort. The deeper argument for freedom, including and especially economic freedom, is moral. Human beings are moral actors, and moral action requires choice. Responsibility requires freedom. Virtue requires agency. And this is why the defense of economic freedom must always be connected to the defense of civil society, family, faith, local institutions, a moral responsibility. Freedom detached from virtue collapses into decadence. Virtue detached from freedom collapses into coercion. This is why the old fusionist project of National Review mattered so much. I believe it matters now more than ever. Fusionism understood something profoundly important, that economic liberty and moral order are not enemies, they are partners. Fusionism rejected two false choices: the false choice that society has to choose between moral order and economic freedom, and the false choice that markets alone are sufficient to sustain civilization. Both are wrong. A healthy society needs free institutions and virtuous people. It needs entrepreneurship and character. It needs prosperity and responsibility. It needs liberty that is ordered towards transcendent truth. The fusionist understanding recognized that the state cannot manufacture virtue, but it certainly can destroy the institutions that cultivate it. What institutions am I referring to that can cultivate virtue, that alone can cultivate virtue? Family, church, community, voluntary associations. Rich mentioned in the introduction my last book, Full Time. I believe work cultivates virtue. I believe that responsibility, the responsibility that comes out of a lifestyle of work, cultivates virtue. Markets do not replace morality, but they are venues for morally formed human beings to create, grow, and innovate. Fusionism protects markets from unconstrained human nature because it properly orders jurisdictions. It disentangles confused roles. The most confusing role of the last 50 years, a paternalistic state. The state cannot be your dad because unlike many of our relationships with our real fathers, the state cannot love us. It increasingly seeks to absorb the mediating institutions that stand between the individual and centralized power. The more people become dependent on centralized systems, the weaker families become, the weaker local communities become, the weaker religious institutions become, the weaker personal responsibility becomes. Dependency is not morally neutral, and neither is confiscatory statism, and neither is central planning. A society that transfers responsibility upward inevitably drains initiative downward. It eventually begins to lose confidence in itself. It undermines the concept of a free society. One of the greatest tragedies of the modern political moment is that too many people have come to see themselves primarily as claimants rather than creators, recipients rather than builders, victims rather than agents. This is a critique we offered the left for 50 years that now applies to so many on the right, tragically. We must stand athwart history saying that free enterprise is a system worth defending because it values the human person in the right way. Because capital markets are fundamentally about belief in the future. I want you to think for a moment about what capital allocation actually is. Through all the demonization of private equity or Wall Street or financial markets or the various issues that have been so profoundly important in driving U.S. economic ascendancy, what we fundamentally are dealing with is a misunderstanding of the very basics of capital allocation, of an investor who is saying, I believe this entrepreneur can create something valuable. I believe this worker can create. I believe this company can innovate. I believe tomorrow can be better than today. We extend debt and equity for a future ROI with capital because we have a hopeful and optimistic vision of the future. Capital formation is always and forever fundamentally an act of optimism. It is also an act of trust. It is an act of social cooperation. It is an act of confidence in human possibility. It is why attacks on capital markets are so incredibly misguided. And I will add, candidly, sometimes so incredibly dishonest. Of course, markets are imperfect because all markets are the activities of free but imperfect human beings. There are bubbles, excesses, frauds, manias, greeds, and speculation. Luckily, nothing bad like that can ever happen from the state, as we learned in the 20th century. See, that one you knew I was being sarcastic. So we're improving as we go. There have always been these nefarious things, incidents, moments, and always will be on this side of glory. But the answer to fallen human nature is not concentrated power, because concentrated power is exercised by fallen human beings too, only now they're not just fallen, but they also have concentrated power. The question is never whether flawed people will exist in markets in any other venue. The question is whether power will be decentralized or centralized, whether failure will be distributed or consolidated, whether correction mechanisms will exist, whether proper incentives will exist, whether innovation can emerge, whether there can be something robust and positive that comes from failure, whether people can remain free to act, fail, learn, build, and then try again. See, the market economy is not perfect because people are perfect. The market economy works because it accounts for human imperfection. And it does so far better than any centralized system can. It disperses power. It allows for adaptation. It creates feedback. It rewards value creation. Centralized systems entrench the ruling class. Markets disrupt them. That is why economic freedom matters, not because every market outcome is morally ideal, but because freedom preserves the conditions under which human flourishing and improvement and progress remain possible. We desperately need to recover the moral legitimacy in this topic, and that includes the moral legitimacy of profit. Profit is not theft. It is not exploitation. In a free exchange, in free trade, profit is evidence that value is created for another person. When an entrepreneur risks capital, employs workers, serves customers, and allocates resources effectively, profit becomes a signal that scarce resources were directed towards productive ends. Cronyism exists, but never more so in a system of imperialistic discretionary tariffs, for example. Corruption exists, rent-seeking exists, but see, free enterprise is antithetical to all of these things. It stands at the polar opposite of an economy of political favoritism. When I hear that we need to go make the case to young people that capitalism is superior to the alternatives, I routinely find that what young people are critiquing is not how you and I would defend free enterprise. It is cronyism. And yet the solution to this problem is things that will further entrench cronyism. When we are told young people don't like markets, therefore we need more central planning, more state power. These are misguided categories and jurisdictions. We need young people to believe again that building something matters, and building something comes out of an economy of freedom. One of the most destructive lies in modern culture is the Keynesian notion that meaning is primarily found in consumption. It is not. Meaning is found in contribution, in responsibility, and in service. In my theological worldview, I view this as part of creation, in work well done. The dignity of work transcends economic metrics, and it becomes about participation in creation itself, because we were made to cultivate, build, organize, invent, and serve. And when societies suffocate enterprise under bureaucracy and dependency, they do not merely reduce growth rates, but diminish human purpose. Let me say something especially important for this moment in history as I prepare to wrap up. Many people today feel anxious, perhaps understandably so, about technology, about globalization, about AI, and other such issues that we see mentioned in the headlines. Some of these concerns are legitimate. Disruption is real. Communities can be destabilized. Transitions can be painful. But my friends, the answer cannot be a retreat into economic nationalism, centralized planning, or anti-market populism. History teaches us that prosperity does not come from insulating society from dynamism. It comes from channeling dynamism productively. And the answer to that change is not in paralysis, but resilience. Resilience is built through strong families, strong communities, strong institutions, strong education, strong moral formation that results in strong local culture, not through permanent dependence on centralized authority. We should absolutely seek policies that strengthen workers, families, savings, investment, ownership, entrepreneurship, and social mobility. But we must never forget that prosperity is created before it can be distributed. That means that capital matters. That means that savings matter, investment matters, entrepreneurship matters, productivity. A culture that punishes capital formation eventually punishes workers, because workers are more productive when equipped with better tools, better technology, better systems, better enterprises. Capital and labor are not natural enemies. They are partners in production, which is to say they are partners in creation. The Marxian tragedy of progressive and new right economics is the attempt to pit them against one another as though prosperity were a fixed pie. Human creativity expands possibilities. This is the miracle of free economies. They transform imagination into abundance. None of this is inevitable. Freedom requires maintenance. Civilization requires stewardship, and economic liberty requires moral confidence. We must again be willing to defend the free society, not apologetically, but affirmatively. Not be embarrassed to defend entrepreneurship, investment, and an honest day's work. We should certainly not be embarrassed to defend the institutions of free enterprise that have done more to alleviate suffering and expand opportunity than any economic system in human history. Our defense must remain rooted to a larger moral vision, because markets are not ultimate things, human beings are, but markets are venues for human beings. The economy exists for the person, not the person for the economy. And this is why coercive statism and ultimately new right ideology fails, because it reduces people into instruments of political administration. The free society recognizes something higher. It recognizes an individual who possesses inherent dignity. Our freedom is not merely procedural. It is deeply connected to what it means to be human. And so the challenge before us is not merely political, but is cultural and spiritual. Indeed, it is civilizational. The free society, my friends, is worth defending because the human person is worth defending. The task before us is to ensure that future generations inherit not merely wealth, but the freedom itself, the freedom that is necessary to not only preserve, but create more wealth. My professional life has been and will continue to be in the capital markets, stewarding wealth and utilizing the miracle of markets towards the achievement of financial aims. But accompanying the blessing that is my professional life is my moral duty to continue studying economic history and doing all I can to defend free enterprise for what it is. A moral architecture that promotes human dignity, that constrains human nature, and that feeds responsibility and the flourishing of creatures made in the image of God. Thank you very much.
All right, that was fantastic. So next, we are going to have a panel discussion here between Senator Phil Gramm and Dominic Pino. The senator is an economist by training. He served in the U.S. House as a Democrat, amazingly enough, and when he left the Democratic Party for Republicans, that was part of a huge political transformation in Texas and the South more generally. He served 3 highly consequential terms in the Senate, and for my money, the most important thing about Senator Gramm is that National Review endorsed him for president in 1996. Some people have some questions sometimes about National Review's presidential endorsement decisions, but this is one you'll never convince me has not stood the test of time. He's also had a highly consequential career since leaving the Senate. I was talking to some friends about this just today. I'm not sure anyone who isn't a columnist for the Wall Street Journal has had more Wall Street Journal bylines over the last 30 or 40 years than Senator Gramm. He's written a number of books, including the most recent one that he co-wrote with Donald Boudreaux, The Triumph of Economic Freedom. Now we have 20 copies, I'm told, just 20 copies, signed copies remaining, or copies that the senator will sign for you if you want one, and they are free. There may not be any such thing as a free lunch, but these books are free, at least to you. We had to pay for them, I assume, but they're free to you. And the senator is going to be in conversation with Dominic Pino, who's an editorial writer at the Washington Post. Prior to that, was with National Review and is one of the brightest stars in the opinion writing firmament. As far as I'm concerned, when Dominic decides to run for president, we'll probably endorse him as well. Take it over, gentlemen.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Rich. Before we get started, I have a story actually. In 2024, I wrote in Senator Graham for president, and I mentioned this in a corner post. Later that day, Senator Graham emailed me and thanked me for my vote. And then said something along the lines of, "I wish there were more of you around in 1996." It's an honor to be able to interview him for you today. You've got a book called Triumph of Capitalism. What is the big takeaway that people should learn about the triumph of capitalism?
Well, first, that it triumphs. The book is really an effort to understand why people have such profoundly different views about the role of government in a free society. Thomas Jefferson said, "Good men with the same facts are prone to disagree." But when people look at the same information, it's not clear they're receiving the same message because they have different backgrounds, they have different perceptions of the lessons of history. They have their personal experience in growing up. They have what they have learned in their life and in their education. And I have found in academics and in politics and in business that when people have profoundly different views, that if you probe and you ask them their interpretation of various periods in American history, what do they think happened in the Industrial Revolution? Were workers impoverished? How successful was progressive era regulation? Did capitalism and greed cause the Great Depression? Did international trade hollow out American industry in the post-war period? What caused the financial crisis? And then the two contemporary issues of poverty and inequality, that you will invariably find that people who have very different views about the role of government have very different perceptions of how the world works and what has happened historically. And so what the book tries to do is to begin by looking at how we form opinions and then look at those five key historical periods in American history and the two contemporary issues, and basically set out the undisputed facts, and then what we call the myth. And the myth is almost always conventional wisdom. In fact, we cite the best-selling high school and college history textbook and the myth almost in every section of the book. And then we try and we present a strong case for the myth, the strongest case we can make. I had 21 historians and economists read the manuscript, and of the 21, 14 thought we went too far in defending the myth. And then we try to refute the myth. And the conclusion is America works, freedom works, free enterprise works. And so I think if you read the introduction in the first chapter, you'll read the whole book.
Yeah, I did. I reviewed the book. It's fantastic, and anybody should pick it up. One of the myths that I think is most pervasive is one that actually David was mentioning in his remarks, which is this myth that since the 1980s, we've had a free market, laissez-faire government in the United States, despite the fact that government spending continues to go up, the regulatory burden continues to go up, the role that the state plays in everyday life continues to go up. And yet, for some reason, there's a lot of people who are convinced that there was some break that happened around the time of Ronald Reagan where everybody became, minimal government free traders, and I've never seen much evidence for it in real life, but how is it you think that that perception seems to be so powerful and so durable?
Well, I think there was a clear break in 1980. We had had 8 years of 9.3% inflation rate. When I went to Washington, the inflation rate was 13.3%, and prime interest rates were 21.5%. And the economy was falling into a double-dip recession. And so the 1980 elections, I think, did change America. But no change is permanent. No victory is final, but of course the flip side, which is a very important flip side, is no defeat is permanent either. And so I think we made a change in America, and I think it dominated the policy of the country for 25 years. But clearly, the election of 2008 represented a fundamental change, just as the election of 1980 did. And the government has been dominated by economic policy that is suboptimal and harmful to the basic economic system pretty much ever since.
Yeah. Your name is on one of the only successful deficit reduction bills that Congress has passed. As the national debt continues to be a problem, we're seeing soaring interest rates or soaring bond yields right now. How did you do it, and how could Congress do it again?
Well, first of all, in all fairness to all the people who have served, I had the advantage that America really believed in 1980 that there was a crisis, and there was a crisis. And we were able to put together a bipartisan effort to dramatically reduce the size of the social welfare state, which had exploded in the 1970s. People don't understand that in the 1970s, with the runaway inflation and 24 different tax brackets, that every time prices went up, the tax burden on working Americans exploded. And so, without ever voting to raise taxes for a decade, the tax burden on American workers grew at 3 times the average rate per year that it had grown previously in the post-war period. And all that money went to fund the making of America as a social welfare state. And so the first thing we had to do was to stop the growth and then to try to reverse it. We did stop the growth. We did partially reverse it through 1988. And out of all fairness, we balanced the budget once we had won the Cold War and got the peace dividend. Both things which Reagan accomplished, Clinton was able to use to balance the budget for 3 years in a row. And it involved compromise. I remember the critical moment. The Louisiana delegation came to me and said, if you will agree and get the president to agree to leave the sugar program alone, we will vote with you on every amendment and on final passage of the Reagan program. So I went to see the president, and I said, this is what they're offering. So he said, well, what do you think? And so I said, well, you got to realize I was teaching college economics 3 years ago, so before you put great stock in what I think, you got to realize I've never done anything this important in my life. And Reagan said, well, neither have I. And so basically, my response was, I hate the Sugar Act. I didn't come here to save the Sugar Act, but I'm afraid we won't win if we don't do it. And so Reagan said, I think this is what they call kissing the pig. And I can say that I never was able to make any dramatic change in public policy, and I'm very grateful that I was able to have an effect on public policy when I was in office, that didn't have something in it I hated. But it was a price I had to pay to get the job done. What we wanted the Reagan program to achieve was more important than saving the Sugar Act.
Yeah, one of those other compromises that Reagan made was on trade issues. You had some protectionist measures that came down in that time, and some people point to those today and say, see, Reagan was a protectionist.
Yeah, listen, I know this story up close and personal. What happened is we had over 50 Republicans vote to bail out Chrysler. And there was a movement when what had happened is that we had a monopoly on heavy manufacturing since the end of World War II because the productive capacity of the rest of the world had been destroyed and 50 million of the best workers had been killed. And basically Detroit had gotten fat and lazy. And when that first Toyota Corolla rolled off the ship in Los Angeles, California, it was a new world. And so we were in the midst of trying to get 218 votes for the budget. And so we couldn't afford to get into a protectionist battle at that point. And so Reagan worked out an agreement with the Japanese where they could import, but that the amount of imports would grow steadily over time. He raised the amount 3 times. He hated the compromise. But we won the Reagan program by 1 vote. We tore down the Berlin Wall with 1 vote. It was Sam Hall of Marshall, Texas, who cast the deciding vote that tore down the Berlin Wall.
Seems worth it, yeah.
Yeah, it was worth it. And look, Reagan was pro-trade not because of comparative advantage or increases in production. He was pro-trade because of freedom. People had a right to buy the best goods that were available as long as they weren't in the process undercutting the national security of the United States. And if there is one argument for protectionism that has been grossly abused, it is the national defense argument. In my career in government, every program done in the name of national defense has hurt national defense. The Jones Act destroyed our commercial ability to ship by sea, so that now oil is shipped from Saudi Arabia to New York instead of Houston, New York, because it's cheaper. And I could go on, but in any case, Reagan understood trade and believed it. And when the protectionists tried to use Reagan, I didn't let that stand.
One of those other myths that you talk about some in the book, and I think is one of the most prevalent that we see, is about the New Deal. The idea that the New Deal ended the Great Depression, the idea that capitalism caused the Great Depression and government saved it, and there seems to be actually a growing number of economists in their research who are saying this doesn't add up. This isn't actually true. But what do you think it's going to take for the broader public to come around to that view?
Read chapter 3 of my book. No, my mama went to her grave believing that Franklin Roosevelt got us out of the Depression. We got into the Depression because of a failure of the Federal Reserve Bank to perform its basic function, which was to provide liquidity for the banks. It became a worldwide depression because of the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Hoover started the New Deal, and Roosevelt's program basically frightened investors because capital does not go where it's not welcomed and does not stay where it's not rewarded. And so investment in America collapsed. And the Depression lasted for 10 years. The data from the League of Nations shows that we were in the Depression longer than any other country in the world. And the Depression really ended in the 1950s. It was only in the 1950s, under Eisenhower, that investment fully recovered, that the Dow reached the level that it has been at in 1929 when the collapse occurred. And economists were in a big debate about if there wasn't a massive government program. As the war ended, we were going back into the Depression. And of course, there was no program, and we didn't go back into the Depression because we had a change in policy. Public policy makes a difference. We're not the richest and most powerful country in the world because the most brilliant and talented people live here. We're the richest and most powerful country in the world because it's here that ordinary people like us have had more opportunity and more freedom than any people who've ever lived. And we've been able to do extraordinary things. But you take away that freedom and that opportunity, and we're very ordinary people. And the system doesn't work very well. And it's a system that has to be constantly defended.
Yeah, I always think one of the proofs of that is you can take a person who lives in a very poor country and they move to the United States and they do well, they become, they all of a sudden become much wealthier just because they're living in a country that has those institutions and freedoms that allow human beings to do what we do.
Well, it used to be that Indians from India prospered everywhere in the world except India.
Yeah.
I'm on a foundation board that gives scholarships to really talented poor kids. 70% of the kids that we selected totally on merit last year had foreign-born parents. They want it. They work hard, they're committed, and they achieve. And that's the genius of America. Again, you look at countries all over the world that have talented people, and yet we outperform those people because it's the system. It's an important lesson to understand.
Yeah, another point on that, one of my professors at George Mason always says, there's 5 majority Chinese countries in the world, and the People's Republic of China is by far the poorest one per person because it's the only one that's communist. And you take the exact same people and the exact same culture, language, all of that, put them in Taiwan instead of in China, Taiwan becomes a rich and prosperous place. That seems like a triumph of capitalism, some might say.
That's right.
So what do you think going forward we can expect from an electorate that seems, as Rich was saying earlier, will elect people like Zoran Mamdani, but will also elect people on the right who don't really care about free markets or are hostile or outright hostile to free markets. Is there a danger of us voting our way into a poorer country and a less free country?
Well, I think we're going to go through, at the end of the Trump administration, a real soul searching, beginning in the Republican Party, as to what we believe and who we are, and what do we want. I think that there is an element now in the Republican Party that basically does not believe in American capitalism, that believe that government can do things better. And we're doing many things today which are setting precedences that when a Democrat is president, that they're going to use to massively expand the power of government. So I think we're heading toward having to make a decision first in the Republican Party. I don't have any problem. I'm a Reagan Republican. I believe in less government, more freedom. I never had a problem running for office. People say, well, what are you for and against? I want less government and more freedom, because I think that makes people happy. It creates prosperity. And it's the struggle we're getting ready to have again. But we've had it before. I very much am affected by the belief that nobody in the long run ever made money by betting against the future of America. So I think pessimism is sort of an excuse for doing nothing. And so I'm not very pessimistic.
Yeah, I don't think you can be pessimistic for you to keep writing as many books and writing as many op-eds as you continue to do. What is the reception? You know, Rich mentioned you've been writing in the public square for decades. How has the reception to your arguments and to the things that you're saying changed over time, if at all?
Well, most people are pretty nice. So I think the people who tend to agree with me come up and say nice things to me. And I think the people who don't just don't bother to say hello. So I'm not sure that I know what the perception is. I know what I believe, and I'm still involved in the debate because I still very much care. I still work. I have a young wife who wants money and would put me in a cheap nursing home if I quit working. And so I had to keep working. But I stay involved in the public policy debate because I wait for somebody to say something I think needs to be said, but when they don't say it, I say it.
Makes sense to me. As you're looking forward to the future of the Republican Party, do you see any leaders who have this vision? Do you have any people that you're keeping an eye on?
It's a hard question. Well, let me begin with just a little reminder. In 1774, Abigail Adams got a letter from John Adams saying, America is about to make decisions that will determine the future of mankind on this planet, and we don't have leaders worthy of the moment, okay? And at that moment, there was an assemblage of leadership assembling in America that had never been equaled in the history of the world, and he didn't know it. So there may be plenty of leaders out there. I like the former governor of Virginia. I like the former governor of Georgia, or the governor of Georgia. I've always had an affection for Rubio. But I don't see I don't see the obvious person now. But again, we're going to have an election in the fall, and as soon as that election's over, you're going to begin to see people emerge who want the job of president. And so I think it's just a matter of waiting to see who offers what.
Yeah, as we wrap up the session here, I can't think of a better person to ask about Texas and about the history of Texas. How has Texas changed in your lifetime? I always, whenever I'm from Wisconsin originally. Whenever I come to Texas, I always feel like there's so much energy here. There's so much stuff happening all the time. People doing stuff, and it is a noticeable thing, I think, in a place like this. But I just want to know how, if at all, has the spirit of Texas changed as it has grown so much, as it has become?
I can't tell. I mean, people are concerned that with all the in-migration, that it will change. I haven't seen that. I think Texans are independent people, and people don't come here to go on welfare. We have the lowest welfare payments of any state in the union. And people come here to work, and it makes a difference. I think Texas is the freest place on the planet. If freedom failed here, it'd fail in the world. I really believe that. I think the uniqueness of our state is that we do have less government, we do have more freedom, and it just produces a tremendous result. So when people hear the words of Horace Greeley, "Go west, young man, go west," they would be wise to respond to that message.
That's a great place to wrap up. Thank you so much, Senator Graham, for these remarks.
Thank you, Senator Graham and Dominic Pino. We'll now have a 15-minute break, and remember, copies of the senator's book are available. All right, everyone, we're going to get started again here with a panel on protectionism and other threats to free market principles. We're going to be joined by Samuel Gregg, president of the American Institute for Economic Research, Bob Lawson of the SMU's Cox School of Business, and moderating the discussion will be National Review's own Andrew Studdiford, who edits our Capital Matters section. Please welcome our panelists.
Well, I'd like to thank Rich for giving the introduction, because frankly, I, in advance, which I now don't need, had printed out a brief description of these two gentlemen. Brief. Sam has written 17 books. What can I say? And you've all over the place. You've also written a book about, I think, a wonderful title. I wish I'd kept it now. About drinking socialism dry or something like that.
Socialism sucks.
Socialism sucks. I mean, who could possibly object to that? And so it's very distinguished. People who, two gentlemen who know a lot more than I do, I can tell you that. It is also rather daunting. I did have some housekeeping matters before we begin. Two, really. And firstly, I'd like to say this has been wonderful, and thank you all for coming. Very much from part of NRI, we're very, very grateful for this and for your attendance, and those coming to speak as well. And I think David Barnson's talk gave a very good sort of background in a way to sort of where we're coming from. But I would like to two housekeeping points, which I think, firstly, Senator Graham took extraordinary risks by mentioning the Jones Act when Dominic Pino was within several hundred yards. I mean, the danger of an explosion was extraordinary. If he knew that, what courage? The other one was the disturbing reference by Mr. Lowry the editor of the National Review, editor-in-chief, referring to the election of Zoran Mamdani as an amazing phenomenon, not in a good way, but amazing. He used the word, slightly detached word, amazing. That is what people say when they're visiting Jurassic Park and the fence has not broken down. I live in New York City, Manhattan. There's nothing amazing. That is not the word that we use to describe Mamdani, or the Enron Mamdani, as I'm calling it at the moment, seeing his approach to the balanced budget, allegedly. So here we are, we're to talk about, in a way carrying on with David's theme, but the tensions that we see within the Trump administration, and perhaps within Trump himself, and with how do they fit into the American tradition of free markets and the success of free markets and protecting free markets. Because I have to say, however bad the auto pen might have been for the economy, terrible, Kamala, might have been even worse. So I was obviously pleased, but the outlook for the economy, I think, brightened. But there were clouds in the sky, and David referred to these. There was the talk that had preceded it about market fundamentalism, which my view is a phantom menace, but it could be used to conjure up some really bad policy ideas, and that has been happening on the right as well as from the left. So was Donald Trump going to succumb to the belief that a government headed by Donald Trump knew what was best for the economy? And so far the answer has been mixed. The administration has cut taxes, it's deregulated, it's fought against ESG, and it has fought against the idiocies of net zero. All of those, I think, are in the great American free market traditions. But some of the clouds have burst. And that, I think, is what we need to talk about. But first, perhaps we could talk about what is the American tradition. You're both very well qualified to talk about this. How do Americans, if we go back to Alexander Hamilton, these days portrayed as sort of dirigiste extraordinaire and tariff man, what is the American tradition with regard to free markets from the beginning, Sam?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's great to be here with National Review and back in the Republic of Texas, as I'm often reminded to call it. So I think the history of America in terms of its tradition of economic activity, America is a commercial republic. That makes it very different from virtually every other society that has existed. It's a society in which the economic tradition was heavily influenced by the Scottish Enlightenment. I was very glad to see the big statue of Adam Smith outside the front. And of course, this is the 250th anniversary of the Wealth of Nations. It's a society in which people like Alexis de Tocqueville, perhaps the greatest observer of the United States, when he came to America in the 1830s, one of the things he said was, everyone is an entrepreneur. Everyone is starting a business, getting halfway through it and then getting distracted and moving off and doing something else and creating another source of wealth. And even during the 1950s, people who came to the United States, and this is a very different America from that existed in the late 19th century, an America that had been profoundly affected by the New Deal, and an America that was about to go into possibly an even worse economic experiment, that being the Great Society. People like the French philosopher Jacques Maritain came to the United States, and he just remarked about how utterly different this society was because of the role commerce played in it, and the contrast with his native France and Europe more widely, to his mind, was simply remarkable. So in other words, commerce, I think, is essential to understanding American identity. That, I think, makes it, as you can probably tell, I'm not from around here, but that really does make it different to outsiders when they come to America and they see this as a bustling, entrepreneurial society. Now, that being said, you mentioned Alexander Hamilton. There has also been another strain of thought that goes back a very long way, that has looked to the government, particularly the federal government, to take a proactive role in the economy. Now, you mentioned Hamilton. Hamilton, of course, his famous report on manufacturing is a type of blueprint for a type of industrial policy. He was a man who had read The Wealth of Nations and said, yes, I think this is basically theoretically correct, but I'm not sure how it works in a world of competing nation states. We need to defend ourselves, we need manufacturing, so we have to create it for ourselves, etc. And you go through American history, the American system, as it was called, associated with Henry Clay in the 1830s, very much almost proto-Trumpian in the way that it understood the economy. And then all the way through the 19th century and 20th century, particularly with the rise of the progressive movement, there were progressives who wanted the government, the federal government, to play a much bigger role in this commercial republic. So I would argue that we see tensions. These tensions have been there for a very long period of time between this bustling, entrepreneurial, heavily commercially orientated people. People come here because they want to be entrepreneurial, they want to be economically successful. They compare it to the disastrous or stagnant economies that they've come from, and they think this is the place to be. But then you have a lot of people in the United States who do want and still want the federal government to play a big role in the economy. And for a long time, we were used to dealing with that on the left. But in more recent years, a lot of it's been coming from the right. I can tell you that since 2015, I've spent more time arguing with people on the right about some of these questions than I have with people on the left. So I think this is a very difficult situation for America, because the consensus that existed really from, I'd suppose, 1980 up until about 2008, I think David Bahnsen was right that 2008 broke something in the American psyche about the economy. You had a broad consensus that even included a fair number of Democrats about America being essentially free market orientated, free trade orientated. That is no longer the case. And I do worry that we will see that tradition slip away unless more of us who believe in free markets are willing to argue the case, not just with the left, but with people who have traditionally been on the right, who have embraced many of these statist ideas.
Thank you very much, Sam. So, Robert, if you to take that, and obviously that we've had a great modern background to that, where do you think, looking at this evolution in American tradition, and please do say where you disagree, but where do you think that this is coming from on the right? Because it's not historical nostalgia. I mean, people aren't, that stupid. Is it 2007, 2008? Was it that, and people scrabbling around to find an alternative thing that they could sell to win elections? Or was there something else that had always been ready to be born, so to speak?
Very good question. I do agree with the 2008 sort of break point in our politics and our thinking about a lot of things. It happened on both the left and the right. It's no coincidence that the woke 2012 seems to be a year, 4 years, just four short years after the crisis, the financial crisis. The whole woke world the thing just went straight up. If you look at any graph of these like intersectionality, the didn't exist, and then all of a sudden it's this crazy thing. But also, this is also the birth of what we now are calling the post-liberal right, and I think they have the same origin story, and I think that David was right this morning or this afternoon in identifying that. I deal in numbers. I'm a numbers guy, and what's the old saying? It's not what they know, it's what they know that ain't so, or something. It's so much of what on both the left and the right, but about the current situation is literally factually incorrect views. I mean, literally things that simply are not true. They think 2 + 2 = 5, for example. And so the left is animated by inequality. And as Senator Graham's book, this book, but also more importantly, the previous book, demonstrate, I think, very effectively, is that the inequality, first of all, the United States inequality is about middling. We're not that unequal compared to the rest of the world. We're in the middle. We're not Sweden, but we're also much more equal than many other places. And it hasn't really gotten that much worse, especially when you understand how the data are collected. Most of the increasing inequality is an artifact of the data collection process. So they're just wrong. I mean, they're just like, they think something about the world, that inequality's gotten worse, there's billionaires, blah, blah, blah. This is what's motivated your mayor. Yep. And it's just not so. It's literally not so. So a lot part of my job is just trying to accumulate the numbers, and Senator Graham's book is very much along with that. But it's also true on the right. It is not the case. It is literally incorrect to say that the United States is not an industrial powerhouse. The United States is an agricultural and industrial powerhouse to this day. And we are the absolute juggernaut in our ability to produce industrial production and food. And the idea that we've hollowed out the industrial is just not true. We have the numbers on this. Now we have hollowed out the jobs. There are no agricultural jobs and there are no manufacturing jobs. Not no, but they're very few, because we are so incredibly productive at both of those endeavors. This is a strength, not a weakness. So I've spent a lot of part of my time is just like bringing facts to the table. I do agree with David. This is necessary, but not probably sufficient. But the first step in the sort of process of trying to convince the people, the hearts and minds of other people who disagree with you, the first step, at least I think, is oftentimes getting us all on a common grounding of facts, and then we can sort of work on the interpretation of those facts.
Yes, and that, of course, is not easy. I mean, Elizabeth Warren, yet again, has come out with a wealth tax. It's the same wealth tax. I mean, she recycles. She's very ecologically conscious, but she's basically said. But I read it with interest, and her latest statement on it, and she's quoting economists, foreign economists, such as was it Gabrielle Zucman? Is it Gabrielle Zucman? And I can't remember whether Piketty was there on the roll of shame, and there was another Frenchman. Isaias, that's the one. And their numbers have been shown to be faulty. There's a problem? We're a little bit off topic here, but but both of you sort of understand this world. People believe what they want to believe.
Yeah, that's why it's not sufficient, right? I mean, I think you do have to work on the moral arguments. We have a God-given right to trade to buy and sell with other people. That's just the way it is. It also makes us richer, and I can demonstrate the fact that it makes us richer and all that other stuff. But we have a right. We are free human beings. So we need a sort of a quiver of arrows. One of the arrows is fixing the data problems, people believing things that ain't so. But then we also need to reinforce the moral message that autonomous human beings have rights. And these rights include commercial rights to buy, sell, trade, import, export, hire, fire, invest. And all of these regulations and taxes and all these grand schemes on the part of the left and the right are interfering on our fundamental human rights. That's part of the story. My particular comparative advantage is more on the data side, but I think we need to have all of those elements in the battle.
Well, what do you say, Sam?
Yes, absolutely. I find when I'm debating, I too have debated Oren Cass. Is there anyone here who hasn't debated Oren Cass? So I did it at Princeton, and I almost decided not to do it because of this issue of facts, because of the constant misrepresentation of facts, outright misrepresentation of what's actually going on in the economy. But I thought, no, I should go there because it's an influential place, etc. And so it's not, but so one is a question of refuting bad facts and putting forward the true facts. But then you have to wrap it up into a convincing narrative that makes it very clear that you believe in free markets, not just because they're efficient, they're obviously more efficient than the alternatives, but also because they're good for America. One of the things I have found that the new right do is they constantly accuse people like us of not caring about our country. We're soulless globalists who love the World Economic Forum, who wish the UN ruled the world, that we believe in no national sovereignty, and all these things. And that's, by and large, simply not true. But we need to build our arguments about the efficiencies of markets, the ways in which it produces wealth, into a convincing narrative that persuades particularly young Americans, and I would even say even more specifically, young American men who animate much of the new right, to persuade them that markets are part of the American story, that capitalism is something that has become, in many people's minds outside the United States, something distinctly American in their minds. And we need to persuade younger people, particularly younger men, those who are rallying behind some of these new right figures, that markets work and they're also part of who we are as Americans. In other words, we have to take the patriotism argument and run with that instead of ceding that to the other side. And this is a general thing I think that free marketers need to be very conscious of. I think we're really good at winning the empirical arguments. I think we're very, very good at that. But I think for a while, I think some free marketers made the mistake of thinking that's all you have to do. You just persuade people of the empirics and the argument is over. Well, we've discovered that that's not true. And the left, by the way, are very good at this. They're not that interested in the facts, but they are exceptionally good at deploying arguments about justice and what's right, because they know that that moves people to vote in ways and act in ways that an efficiency argument won't necessarily do. So yes, I think that's part of what we have to do when it comes to making these arguments. Unfortunately, we're finding we have to do it across the political spectrum now, and that's a more unusual situation that we haven't really confronted for a long time. I will, however, say that it's not completely unprecedented, even in more recent history. You can go back to the 1990s, and there was a man named Pat Buchanan, who was arguing things like free trade is literally leading to the deaths of Americans. Free trade is emptying out our country. Free trade is destroying the American family. So people like Donald Trump and some of his ideas about economics, they're not that far away from that particular period. And let's not forget that Pat Buchanan got a lot of people supporting him, and he basically cost George H.W. Bush, I think, a second term as president, because he had an economic message that, whether we like it or not, resonated with a lot of Americans. My point being is that this surge of what we call the new right, we often think of it going back to 2015. It has a much longer, and I'm afraid in some cases, a much darker history than we often imagine.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think also it's a vital point that we all need to remember, those of us on the sort of the free market side, about the importance of, you've got to make, and gosh, it sounds like Oprah or something, but you've got to make an emotional connection. I watched on British TV, this was just before Mrs. Thatcher was elected. It was a debate between, Sam, you probably know who he is, William Waldegrave.
The Deputy Prime Minister to Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, was she William Whitelaw? No, Willie Whitelaw would have never done this. It was totally different. Not his style. This was a brilliant intellectual dissection. That was not, William Whitelaw was a great man, but brilliant intellectual dissections were not what he did. And, but Waldegrave took apart the British welfare state, how it was financed, how it was run, how it was failing to deliver. It was 20 extraordinary minutes. And he was debating a very prominent trade unionist called Jack Jones, who later revealed, unfortunately, to have been in the pay of Moscow, but never mind. He was a very prominent one. So I listened to Waldegrave, impressed, and he gave this great talk. I thought, gosh, well, this is going to win. This is going to win. Jack Jones, I won't do his accent, he just stood up and said, that's all very well, William, all very well. But you're talking about pensioners being cold in the winter. He won the debate easily. So that is what we have to contend with. And one of the issues, perhaps I'll give to you, is the patriotism issue, because we all know that Adam Smith said that if it's a choice, defense comes before opulence. I mean, he phrased it more.
Defense trumps opulence.
And obviously, but Senator Graham made the tremendous point about how, and discussions with the future President Pino, this is often heard, about how what the concept of what is strategic can shift. And for example, there is the marvelous case of Kashmir. I think it's Kashmir subsidies. And if you Google it, it's a great story about the indestructible Kashmir subsidies benefiting, I think, possibly Texas, actually. And the idea was that we were going to run out of materials for military uniforms. And it made vampires look like, easy meat. I mean, this thing just survived and survived. Anyway, Google it, it's fun. What is strategic? Do you think, Rob, do you think there is a real strategic exception? And what we've seen under Trump is, if we look at rare earths, something which I have some sympathy for, I'll just reveal what I think, but in other areas, we've seen policies which have been justified on strategic grounds, which have included things which you've really never seen, except arguably at times during the Second World War, of taking direct equity stakes in companies, particularly defense companies, or that's been pondered, which strikes me as a mistake. But equally, the patriotic, this globalist friend of Klaus Schwab, Andrew Satterfield, which is a new one for me, I have to say, doesn't want to defend America. Does this argument hold up?
I haven't seen it yet. I'll be honest. I've looked at every case I've ever come across my desk. I've yet to see a convincing argument for a significant industrial policy or trade policy on security grounds that made any sense. I mean, you hear about the sugar quota. Well, we can just invade Cuba. I mean, we've been wanting to do that for a long time anyway. I mean, or the rare earths. This is Denmark. It's not. If Denmark is suddenly an enemy, we don't have access to Greenland's rare earths. We are in much bigger trouble than if steel. Yes, our steel capacity has diminished somewhat, but steel is made in like 50 different countries. If they are all our enemies, we're screwed anyway, right? I mean, the point is, we are still going to trade with our allies and our friends. Is the strength of the best national security we can have is to have a lot of allies, military allies that we can trade with. So I keep looking for one that I think is going to be convincing, and I've yet to find one. So I think in I'll be honest, each and every case, I think it's a sham argument that is hiding a protectionist argument, an old-fashioned self-interest argument.
And would you, just to follow on from that, would you make the case that having I'm not going to bias this too much, having flexible tariff rates that go up and down the whole time on whims from time to time, is that the best way to developing the trading relationships that we need to protect us in dire times?
I loathe the international trading system that we have, but I have become a grudging admirer of these bad-dressed bureaucrats who go and meet in different places and they hammer out these horrible agreements because they are truly the best we're going to ever get. The reality is the same kinds of protectionist interests that we have in this country also exist in Indonesia and Brazil and fill in every other country. And the way we get freer trade is to have these bureaucrats hammer out deals. And each and every one of those deals, as Senator Graham said, includes stuff that's absolutely odious, but that's the way to go, and it has worked. We have demonstrated work, over the last 50 years. And you can call it globalism if you want, but it has made the world richer and more peaceful than any time in human history. So, so I think we really need to be cautious of those types of arguments. I think they really have been overblown. Everybody says, hey, give me, this is for the kids. Well, it's also, this is for the security. It's the same kind of BS argument we hear in a lot of other domestic policies.
Sam, what do you say to that?
I broadly agree with that. Every time someone starts citing national security to me as a reason for a tariff or an industrial policy, you draw back the curtain and there is invariably a special interest that is, or several special interests that are pushing a particular agenda. Now that doesn't mean we should be blasé about national security issues, but I do think that free markets and free trade are actually better at realizing some of the most important dimensions of national security that are necessary for any country. If you talk to anyone or read any of the great theorists of national security, they invariably start by saying that the most important thing for national security is a strong economy. A strong economy is the sine qua non of a strong national defense. If you have a weak economy, like the Soviet Union had, at some point that is going to catch up with you. Which then leads to the next question is, well, what makes an economy strong? What makes an economy strong is private property rights, rule of law, limited constitutional government, open markets, competitive markets, lots of entrepreneurship, and not being afraid of the rest of the world. If you have all those things in place, you will have a very strong economy, and countries will think twice before going to war with a country that has a dynamic, competitive, open economy, because such economies can fight wars for a very long period of time. They tend to be much more adept at producing sophisticated technology that America exceeds at. So all these things, I think, point in the direction of, if you're serious about national security, and I tend to take people at their word when they say that they are, then I think, economically speaking, that should incline you to embrace free markets and all the institutional things that I just mentioned as being essential for building the type of economy that ultimately makes people very wary about going to war with you.
Good answer there. But now I'm looking at the thing, and we've got just 2 minutes left, so it's time to talk to the future. Which I hope will be rather longer than 2 minutes. But if I have a concern, one of the concerns I have is that we're talking about winning the argument. The future is about winning the argument in many ways. And we are opening some dangerous doors at the moment in economic discussion on the right. For example, the constant beating up on technology, price controls. Price controls, we know, are ridiculous, a failure, and yet they keep floating to the surface. Government intervention, the idea also of government being used, sort of meddling in the affairs of companies and corporate governance. Antitrust is not nearly as bad as it was which is a real low bar under Biden and Lina Khan, but we're sort of opening the door, I think, for the left with some of what we're doing on the right. When I say we, what is being done on the right? We have 1 minute, 30 seconds each, roughly speaking. Who wants to go?
Yeah, I'm an optimistic, actually. This is where the study of history helps. I just finished a book about John Quincy Adams. I mean, the 1830s, 40s. Oh my gosh, this is calm and collected what we have going on in our country right now compared to those times. So I think the adults in the room are still here, and they're gonna reassert themselves very soon.
I'm an optimist as well. I think of the election of 1800. If you want to see a really wild election, go back then. So in other words, we've been through some of these types of things before. But economically speaking, I think that the American economy, even despite something as disastrous as the New Deal, even after all the measures associated with the Great Society programs, which we're still suffering from today in terms of their impact, particularly upon minority populations, we are still the most dynamic, most competitive economy in the world. We also have the highest levels of entrepreneurship in the world. And guess what? People want to come here to America. They generally don't want to go to China. They don't want to go to the country that I think a lot of Americans are looking at and saying, that's the big rival. Yes, they are a big rival, but they are hobbling themselves with very, very bad policies now that I think in the end are going to make them less of a world power economically speaking. And the more that we avoid those types of policies, the more we make it clear that we are not looking at ourselves as having a Chinese-like future. If we put trust in our free market tradition, I'm very optimistic and very bullish on America.
Well, excellent. What a great note. Conservatives are accused of gloom and despair. And how nice it is to meet two gentlemen with a good, optimistic view. And thank you both for a very informative and very educational discussion. And many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. So, as all of you know, Texas is an incredible engine of growth. On its own, it would be the 8th largest economy in the world, bigger than Canada, not that that's saying much, bigger than Russia, bigger than Italy, and this is one reason the Texas Stock Exchange is about to launch. So we're going to discuss that next and the future of capital markets in this country. You're going to be joined by Landon Gibbs, who's a managing partner at Altitude Ventures, on the board of many institutions, including the National Review Institute, and the great Jeb Henserling, the former congressman and chairman of the House Financial Affairs Committee, who is a strategic advisor to the Texas Stock Exchange, and will be joined once again by Dominic Pino as the moderator. Gentlemen.
Right. Are we really going to call it Y'all Street? Is that what we're, yeah? Yeah? That's what we're doing? Okay, cool.
You have to have a cowboy hat on to list your company.
Okay. I think I can work with that. What's the advantage of having another stock exchange? Why do we need another one?
So full disclosure, I'm invested in the stock exchange, so let me get that out there. But I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm super excited about the stock exchange. I think we've got a duopoly going on in the stock exchange market between the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. I think anytime we add competition, it's a great thing, and I think it makes a ton of sense. So if we looked at some of the things that's happened, we've had a major decrease in the amount of companies that have listed. It's for a variety of reasons. Some of those reasons include some of the regulatory burden that's been put on these companies through the stock exchanges. Some of it has to do with ESG. Some of it has to do with some of the DEI policies that even got overturned in the Court of Appeals. So there's a variety of reasons, and I think it's really exciting, especially to have an exchange in a state like Texas that believes so much in freedom and liberty. And so I think having that here where folks can maybe worry about the governance of their company instead of putting the governance in the stock exchange. And I think you'll see companies that maybe are in the energy sector that prefer to be listed in Texas versus some other areas. I think some of these other companies that maybe around the ESG initiatives in particular may want to be listed in a state like Texas. So I'm super excited. I think it's a great thing for our country.
Yeah, I was looking before coming up here. New York has been the business capital of the United States for a very long time. In 1900, the population of Dallas. Do you have any idea what the population of Dallas was in 1900?
I wasn't around then.
Any guesses? It was 42,600 people. It barely existed, and yet now it's one of the biggest cities in the country, and could be a place that has a new stock exchange pretty soon. But also, lots of companies are just moving, not just to Dallas, but to Texas in general. We did a piece when I was at National Review about Chevron moving its headquarters to Texas, and Chevron used to be called Standard Oil of California, and it used to be right there in the name, and now they're not in California anymore. But that's just one example. Can you talk a little bit about the movement of businesses to Texas?
Well, first, Dominic, if I could, I just want to say something on a personal note, how happy I am that National Review would invite me to be part of this panel. There were 3 events that happened 100 years ago when I was an undergraduate at Texas A&M that profoundly impacted my life. The most important of which was I signed up for a course called Econ 311, Money and Banking, taught by Professor Phil Graham. Changed my life. The second thing I did was I became a sustaining member of the Cato Institute. But the third thing I did as an undergraduate is I spent $15 a year to subscribe to National Review. And I went back and I looked on an inflation-adjusted basis. That's the equivalent of 4 cases of beer. Okay, so for 4 years, my opportunity cost of 4 cases of beer. So I am grateful, and it's just a testament to how much I think of National Review. So again, it's a real honor to be here. So we have seen, Dominic, for the last 10 years, the greatest corporate relocation movement in American history, and almost all of it is coming to Texas. And I think there's a number of different reasons why that's happening. Now, as we all know, to a carpenter, everything looks like a nail. Okay, well, to an elected official, everything looks like public policy. Texas has gotten public policy right. And it really dates back, number one, to the early part, I want to say 2003, 2004, when Texas engaged in tort reform. Previously, this was the trial bar's dream, and it's gone from their dream to their nightmare. And once that happened, it became the dream of corporate America to come here. And since everybody in this room knows, we're one of 8, 9 states that has no income tax. And although we claim not to have a corporate tax, we got this franchise tax, but it's minuscule. It's minuscule. And now we have our own business courts. And in the last legislative session, there has been a huge package of laws that has really made Texas, it's just going to super energize the movement of corporate relocations because it will codify the business judgment rule, among other matters. And so Texas is now competing with Delaware for incorporations. And it's really the vision of our governor, and I'm a huge Governor Abbott fan. And I'm never running for public office again, so I don't need to needlessly flatter him. But he is a big visionary in trying to kind of complete this ecosystem to make Texas not only the best place to do business, to headquarter a business, to incorporate a business, but ultimately to take a business public. And the Texas Stock Exchange, which is really his dream, is kind of the last portion of this ecosystem. But I can tell you, in my humble opinion, there is no, if a general counsel is not telling a CEO about the changes in statutory law in Texas, they're negligent, because this truly is the most business-friendly, pro-capitalist state you could come to.
And when we think about the topic of this, the future of capital markets, how much do we think that capital markets have themselves to blame for some of the problems that they have? You mentioned companies coming public. We've seen a real decline in big IPOs. Now we're going to have a couple big IPOs coming up here pretty soon for some really big companies. But we've seen a decline in that in general, and it doesn't seem to promote a lot of confidence in public markets if companies decide, hey, it's actually better if we stay private.
Well, it was an issue I worked on when I was in Congress, not as successfully as I had hoped. We have half the public companies today than we had in 2000. Today, 90% of the companies that have 100 million in revenue or more are all private. And as I think a lot of people know, the companies that are going public later in their growth cycle. And so when I think about the value, number one, of kind of democratizing investment in America and allowing working people to be able to invest earlier on, the lack of IPOs has really hurt that opportunity. And then also just for the dynamic of American capitalism, not to have really that fundamental opportunity to either go to the public markets or the private markets for capital. Now, a lot of this is bad legislation, bad regulation coming out of Washington, but part of it is the duopoly itself. Part of this is driven, and it was alluded to earlier, NASDAQ not long ago was force-feeding companies that were listed on NASDAQ. They were force-feeding ESG. And by the way, then turning around and selling them software compliance. I mean, it's a great gig if you can get it, I suppose. And, the New York Stock Exchange, they didn't force it, but they kind of nudged them in that direction. And the great thing about the Texas Stock Exchange is that they are not pro-ESG, they're not anti-ESG, they're non-ESG. In other words, this is the decision that is left to boardrooms and C-suites. And companies appreciate getting back to basics on corporate governance. And the Texas Stock Exchange is designed to be an issuer-aligned exchange, which you really don't see with the other two. And let me leave on this point, if I could. We have competition now in stock trading, ever since we've had something called regulation NMS, okay? The SEC changed a regulation, and now you have 200 alternative trading venues besides the two stock exchanges. And what has happened, and that dates back to maybe 2008, I think. Since then, you've had all this innovation. You've had best order routing, high frequency trading. You've seen bid-ask spreads really compress. You got zero commission retail trading, and trading over the market now costs 50% less in real terms than it did in 2008. But you haven't had that same competition in listing that you had at trading. So there's been almost zero innovation. There's been direct listing, SPACs. Outside of that, the list gets mighty small. And the price to trade is actually, on inflation-adjusted terms, even more. There has been no competition. And if there's going to be competition coming from somewhere, it's going to be Texas.
Yeah.
Look, I would just say that I think all of this is a good thing. Mm-hmm. We've got to get things down to a retail level where folks are wanting to be part of the market. And I'm a practitioner by day, so all I do is invest, all day in a variety of assets, and we're super bullish on the future and where we're headed, and we have a choice to make where we deploy our assets and capital, and we love to invest in states in the Southeast primarily, in Texas and Tennessee and Florida, and we're going to continue to recruit companies. I think you're going to see this huge day where you're going to see all the folks in New York City start moving, which we've already seen, towards Florida, towards Texas, towards Tennessee, all of these states that are great places to live that have no income taxes. It's going to continue to grow. That's where we're going to deploy our capital. And we hope that we continue to push this down more and more to this retail level so you can get more people participating in this earlier.
Can I pile in on that? I'm a firm believer in anecdotal evidence. So Senator Graham and I have a friend who used to be highly placed at BlackRock, left maybe 5-6 years ago, started his own financial firm. I remember having a conversation with the guy. Oh, listen, New York is going to be the center of finance in the universe, until Gabriel blows his horn. And he gave me all the reasons why New York had to be the center of finance in the world, in the United States. So I talked to this guy maybe twice a year, and I called him in February. I'd seen the weather report. I said, man, you must be really cold today. And he said, no. What do you mean? I said, it's 10 below in New York City. He said, well, I moved to Florida. So I said, well, what happened to New York? Well, no, you really don't have to be in New York. Now, we lost him to Florida, okay? But that goes to there's a push-pull dynamic, okay? New York's pushing them out. California's pushing them out. Texas, Florida, Tennessee are pulling them in. I was in New York for a board meeting about 2 weeks ago, and I met with a guy who's chairman of a CEO of a public company, kind of in blockchain space, loves New York, and he told me, after Mondami was elected mayor, he said, you know what, it's gonna take a lot to get me out of New York, a whole lot. And then he paused and said, but you know what, 3 months ago, I went and visited Austin. I could live there.
And I think you're going to continue to see this. I don't think it's been decided or announced, but I think there's a good chance that Apollo moves out of New York City and moves to Austin, Texas. And so I think there's going to be firms like that that are continuing to move down here. Nashville got Alliance Bernstein in recent years. I think you're going to continue to see this push to states that have this, great place to live, less regulatory burden, just much easier. And it's really amazing. So in Nashville, earlier this week we got the Super Bowl. A couple of weeks ago, we took 2,000 corporate jobs from Starbucks. So now Starbucks is moving, a big chunk of their corporate headquarters. They suspect we'll get more of those, and we're seeing as that push-pull, every week a new California company, New York companies moving to one of these states.
Yeah, I love the example of Austin. Lots of people moving there, and yet they had rents go down. They decreased because, one, you're allowed to build more housing there, and two, they don't have rent control. And Texas is amazing because not only do the cities not have rent control, the state bans rent control. And yet, and I shouldn't say yet because it makes it sound like a contradiction, it's not. Housing remains pretty affordable in a lot of parts of Texas. There are definitely areas where it's expensive, but that's true everywhere, right? So it always seems like Texas is just a place where you can build stuff. It's where you're allowed to try things. And how is it that the state has been able to, and maybe Jeb's a better person to ask because you're from here, but how is it that the state has been able to maintain that culture of independence, of freedom, of trying stuff and letting stuff fail and moving to something else?
There's just a Texas spirit and a Texas ethos. It's a can-do state. I mean, for example, we talked a little bit about taxes, and our tax policy is very important. But I think the regulatory policy is even more important. I mentioned Governor Abbott earlier, and he tells, probably a lot of y'all have heard him speak and probably heard this anecdote 1,000 times. But he talks about a conversation he had with Elon Musk, that Elon Musk, has his telephone number, calls him anytime. I met Elon Musk twice. He never asked for my telephone number, but we'll put that aside for the moment. And he was considering putting his gigabyte factory in Austin. And in California, all the permitting was going to take like 6 years, and that is if he got it at all. And he told Abbott, I want to get it done in 18 months. And the governor said, can do. And so from concept to production in Texas was 18 months. I mean, as Senator Graham said, capital goes to where it's made to feel welcome. Capital is very welcome in Texas. We say, welcome, y'all. What is it we can do to help? And in New York and California, it's, beatings will continue until morale improves. So number one, it's the tax policy, it's the tort policy, it's the regulatory policy. But I'll also say this. When I left Congress, I went to work for a global bank. And I love being there. It was very good for the Henserling family bank account. But I can tell you this, it was New York-based. And their policies arose in kind of this crucible of New York think. And that's very different than Texas think. And so in Texas, you're going to get different decision making. And now we have a stock exchange that's Texas born, bred, and led. And so people know if they come here, again, this is going to be created in the Texas ethos. And, you know, it's where we want you to dream big dreams. And we're here to help, and people want to come. And, you know, there's also just a Texas mystique and a Texas brand. My wife and I just came back literally 3 weeks ago from a vacation in Morocco. And we hired a driver to take us to the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. I didn't even know Morocco had mountains. And so the driver we hired, he spoke okay English. And we're having a conversation. He said, well, where are you from? I said, well, we're from Texas. And the guy starts belting out, all my exes live in Texas. Hey, this is a Moroccan cab driver. Okay, and my point is whether I'm in Zimbabwe, whether I'm in Ecuador, whether I'm in the Czech Republic, you say Texas, and people's eyes light up. So it's a brand, it's a decision making, it's public policy, it's all of that. And so I don't know how long I'm going to live, but I tell you what, I think that it's going to be Dallas, Texas, in less than a generation, which is going to be the financial capital of the United States.
All right. Yeah.
I'm going off script a little bit, but I'm really jealous of what y'all have got going in Ballstrip with Elon and all of his companies. If you haven't been there, it's absolutely incredible, the amount of innovation that's happening right here in Texas. So we've been fortunate enough to partner with Elon in Nashville to build a transit system. It's about 25 miles of transit. And what they're doing to revolutionize how you can bore underground, and the technology and the amount of engineers that will move to Texas because the speed at which they create new innovation is just absolutely incredible. So like, I'll give you an example. In Memphis, they built one of Elon's one of his Colossus, you've probably read a bunch about this week. So one of his data centers that Anthropic's paying $1.25 billion a month to rent. And he did the same thing. He comes in and says, hey, I want this up and going in a year. And in a year, he became the second largest taxpayer in the city of Memphis. But you're seeing that, and what y'all have got is this pocket outside of Ballstrip where you're going to have so many engineers, so much talent that continues to move here and innovate in this creative way. And I think it'll be a catalyst for quite a few things in this area.
Yeah, zooming out a little bit from Texas and talk about markets in general now. Landon, you're an investor. I know as an investor, I'm sure you don't want to make predictions about the stock market, so I won't ask you to do that. But I
bet on America all the time.
There you go.
And
there you go.
Long looking forward.
That's great. That's what we like to hear. One of the things, though, that I just look historically at stock market indexes, and there were in the past long periods of time where they didn't do very much. They're pretty flat, and especially since about 2010, we just see this rocket in stock markets in the United States, and it just seems to go up no matter what. You have this crazy, all of the turmoil in the oil markets in the Middle East and things like that, and stock market's still record high. It just keeps going and going. Is that sustainable? Is that something that we can keep doing and keep counting on, or will there be any kind of reversion to the mean here?
What a terrible question to ask.
Glad he asked it of you.
Yeah, no joke. Could we keep going? Absolutely. I mean, we have some really good policies in D.C. that people like, especially some of the tax policies that's happening. As an investor, that makes me want to invest. But there's other things that if we don't do right, it won't be sustainable, and it will turn back around. I mean, our economy, we have to continue to believe in it and grow it. For us, we're very cautiously optimistic when we're making those bets in the marketplace itself, in the stock market. But long term, we're going to win. It's just how long your horizon is. I am very bullish, just in general now, on several different sectors because of artificial intelligence. I love seeing all the manufacturing back in the States. I love seeing the defense tech and that industry. So we're bullish. I love seeing what's going on in the tech sector and AI in general. Like, as an investor, I'm extremely bullish. I would tell you all that from our shop, we put every deal we've ever done into artificial intelligence, and we know, a lot that we didn't know beforehand that we can pull out at a moment's notice. I could fire, if I wanted to, half of our analysts, and we could, get smaller. We've got, folks all the time looking to do different things with artificial intelligence, making whole software solution stuff. We are absolutely bullish on investing in technology and what we can do. So I didn't answer your question specifically because, I think there's a lot that goes into determining whether a market goes up or down. Some of that is monetary policy that could, affect that. And so I don't have a crystal ball on some of the monetary and regulatory policies but in terms of entrepreneurship itself and the innovation that we're seeing, it could be a really special time.
Jeb, is there any concern that you have looking at the way that that the market has risen and how much of those gains have been carried by just a handful of companies that are doing really, really well? The top 10 or so in the S&P 500 account for something like half of the stock market gain. Are you at all worried about too much of a concentration in the enormous growth in a handful of companies and stagnation everywhere else?
Well, I think the short answer is yes. Well, what I'm really worried about is I just had a son graduate from college and he needs a job, but we'll put that aside for the moment. Yeah, we all know this. The S&P 500 is concentrated in the Magnificent Seven, and I think it's, third of the market cap, 50% of the earnings. So that is a whole lot of concentration, which again is another reason we need to have more companies within our public markets. If I could, as a good politician, I want to segue into a question you haven't asked. And that is, I want to talk just a...
You're not supposed to announce you're doing that.
Well, I'm more honest than I used to be. But I want to speak just briefly about kind of the opportunity and the threat of having Dallas become kind of the capital market center. One, I don't even think people in Texas realize we now have more financial professionals in Texas than they do in New York. Today in Texas, the financial services industry is equal to the oil and gas industry. Now, oil and gas extraction, not industry writ large. But very few people know this. And if you look at capital markets, it's so accretive, it has such an incredible multiplier effect. This is an industry that we really want to have nurtured in Texas. And again, it kind of completes this ecosystem. But the threat, once again, is Washington. If you look at the advantages that Texas has for capital markets, if Elizabeth Warren and Maxine Waters and the rest of the rogues gallery has their way, so much of the advantages we have will be federalized. ESG will be forced down everybody's throat. There is a national financial transactions tax that'll be, cast down everybody's throats. Elizabeth Warren has a bill that will take away corporate governance for our largest corporations and cite it in Washington, D.C., so that's the threat. The advantage you have in public policy in Texas, and I see my good friend Dan Branch over there, who's a great leader in our state legislature. But in Texas, the public policy, by and large, is bipartisan. It is long-standing. Some of it is enshrined in our Constitution. And so that's a huge advantage for our capital markets, but we're going to have to work to keep it. So I hope that people in Texas understands what this burgeoning industry can mean to our state and work to preserve.
And just one last question. I don't want to end on a down note, but the other market, the bond market, is something that is also looking questionable at the moment for not just the United States, but for all rich countries. We're seeing huge run-ups in bond yields, signaling that investors are not confident that the wealthy countries of the world are going to be able to pay back their debts. What should that mean for is this finally the warning sign of the fiscal crisis that we all think is coming, or is this yet another apparent false alarm?
We're going to give that to you.
Wonderful.
Kevin Warsh, I've known him for a long time. He's a really solid guy. He's got his hands full coming into this job, but I think he will be up for the challenge.
Well, I forgot who said it, but something that is unsustainable has a tendency to stop. So we've known for quite some time that the debt is unsustainable. And bond vigilantes are one day, like Rip Van Winkle, going to wake up. And you're also going to have a couple of kind of pressure points that are coming up fairly soon, and that is the insolvency of Medicare Part A, the insolvency of the Social Security Trust Fund. And Congress is going to have to do something at that point. Otherwise, unfortunately, we're going to have to wait. Again, we don't know when the bond vigilantes will act. And people say, well, this can never happen in America because we're the world's reserve currency. Okay, it wasn't that long ago across the pond in the UK, the Liz Truss government, I think it set the record for the shortest lived government in UK history. They came up with a fiscal plan that just blew a hole in the fisc. Bond markets reacted terribly. They headed for the exits. They had a certain pension fund law that was causing all their pensions to go. Long story short, they had to completely reverse. Liz Truss was thrown out of office, and you think, well, okay, the pound is not the world's reserve currency, but it is a world's reserve currency. The UK is the, I think, 6th largest economy in the world. Okay, it did happen there. And I do remember in the 9/11 Commission that the great indictment was there was a failure of imagination. And I fear we have a failure of imagination among our policy makers. What will happen if we don't start to bend that cost curve? So I don't think it's too late, and like Senator Graham and others, I'm still going to bet long on America, but boy, there could be a painful interim to get there.
All right. Thank you so much, guys.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our next guest, who will be joining me here soon before he when he stops chatting with everyone else back there, is Karl Rove. Karl? Karl Rove. Karl Rove. So because Karl's wisdom is literally sought after around the world, he is joining us straight from Amsterdam. He made it here with about 20 minutes to spare. I began getting my text from Karl about how he was tracking literally at 3:30 a.m. this morning. But Karl, we know you must be a little tired, so we're really grateful that you're here.
Exhilarated to be here. Actually, this is a big moment for me because today, when I landed at DFW, I circumnavigated the globe because I left last Thursday for Tokyo and then went from Tokyo to Amsterdam and Amsterdam to here. So,
literally globetrotting. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the state of the the Republican Party with an emphasis on some of these free market issues we've discussed, and then we'll do some punditry as well, since we have Carl, so we want to hear that. So, Carl, when I think about the state of the Republican Party, I think it's kind of mixed. It reminds me a little bit of a story Reagan used to tell about Brezhnev. Brezhnev was asked by a reporter, Premier, how would you summarize the state of the Soviet economy in one word? And Brezhnev said, good. And then a reporter said, how would you summarize it in 2 words or more than 1 word? He said, not good. So, I think Trump's done a lot of good things. We also have the protectionism and the impulse to kind of take stakes of companies in not necessarily legal ways always. And then you have a faction of the party, not necessarily dominant. We were discussing that in the back just a few moments ago. That is more populist than Trump. Thinks the party should be more purely populist. So how do you read the state of the GOP at the moment?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I have to share that when I was a youngster at the University of Utah, the great man came to the campus, William F. Buckley Jr., and I was his host. I got to escort him around the campus, and he was outrageously funny and incredibly provocative and enormously stimulating, and also had the worst halitosis of any human being I've ever met. And I remember going away thinking, God, I should have brought some breath mints or something. But anyway, look, the state of the Republican Party is good and not good. I think that's a very apt analogy. And I think you need to think about it in 2 ways. First of all, think about the winning coalition for Trump. First of all, he goes out and says, this is one of the biggest landslides ever. No, it's one of the 3rd closest elections in modern history. And having been responsible for one of the closer ones, I'm glad it wasn't, it was at least a win. But think about how he got elected. There's about 30 or 35% of the electorate, maybe 36%, that said, we love the guy. We love everything he says. We love how he gives the middle finger to the establishment. He was the guy who promised he'd take the brick and throw it through the plate glass window of American politics, and we love him. And we love everything he does and how he says it and what he does. And then we had 13 or 14 or 15% of the electorate that said, I got my doubts. He's not a good model for our children. I don't agree with some of the things that he says. But I have to admit that things were better when he was president. And more important than that is I can't stand 4 more years of this. And she never gave a explanation of how she was going to be different. Presidential elections are about change or more of the same. And he was change. We're going to go back to more of what you heard from me before. And she was more of the same. And yet she almost won. But the Republican Party, it strikes me, is, and the argument is over how it's split. You have some sort of traditional moderate Republicans. You have plenty of, I would call them sort of Reagan conservatives. And then you have an element of populism. And we take a lot of the sort of the traditional conservatives and we think that they're MAGA because they are applauding him. So when he talks about, patriotism and strong military, or he acts, abroad, gives the middle finger to our European allies, they say he's being strong. He's a strong American leader. But they're not MAGA. They're not neo-isolationists. They really do believe America has an important role to play in the world. They do really believe, when he says, I'm going to put a tariff on, they're not exactly enthusiastic about it, but they do think that we ought to be treated fairly in trade and that we are not treated fairly by some countries. So, but there's going to be and when he slides away from the scene, there's going to be a battle for the future of the conservative movement and the Republican Party through which the conservative movement speaks. And the question is going to be, is it going to be more a party that's in conformity to the values and views of, say, our esteemed former Senator Phil Gramm, or is it going to be in the view of, sort of the neo-populists who are on the right? I think it is likely to end up being more like the traditional conservative party because populism, one of the weaknesses of populism is it springs from dissatisfaction with things as they are, a sense of aggrievement, and that aggrievement is personified by its leader. So it's the 1930s, and the populist movement has a right faction and a left faction. The left faction is the persona of Huey Long, every man a king. Take from them's that got and gives to them's that don't. And the right populism is Father Coughlin, broadcasting 50,000 watts every night from Detroit. The Depression it was brought about by the Jews and their allies on the Wall Street. And when both men, for different reasons, Long is killed, Father Coughlin gets discredited, that sense of populism sort of dissipates. And so my sense is that when Trump begins to move from the scene, nobody has his skills out there in that. J.D. Vance, Donnie Jr., Steve Bannon, whatever figure you want to connect with the populist impulse of Donald Trump, none of them have the feral ability to connect with people on a personal level like he does.
So, speaking of history, do you think that we've ever had a president who's had a tighter grip on his party than Donald Trump? So we've had dominant figures as president, FDR, but there's a huge faction of Democrats in the South who are not New Deal Democrats. Andrew Jackson, we have a whole new political party created to oppose Andrew Jackson. We have Polk running as a Jacksonite, a couple terms later, but I can't think of anyone who's had the willingness and ability to go directly into races and just destroy people's careers, like shooting ducks down at a carnival game.
Yeah, no, it's without. I mean, people have tried it. We have the famous example of FDR attempting to take out a bunch of people in the 1938 election who refused to support his court packing scheme, and it blew up in his face. But nothing in primaries blows up in his face so far, and I think that's probably likely to be the case. We still have a bunch of primaries left, and he will be.
So what accounts for that? It's just the bond he has with Republican voters and the technology and the willingness to.
Well, and I also think it is because we're in a highly polarized period. The polarization in our politics. I mean, we're not. It's not a team. It's warfare, and they're not our political rivals. They are our enemies, and both sides feel that way. And so they view it as a life and death struggle for the future of the country, obviously from different angles. But yeah, no. Though look, there are political laws, and for everything that you do, there is a reaction, and the question is the cumulative effect of that reaction, and how can the actors in the drama have an effect on you? And I frankly think it was a mistake. Look, if he was going to be for Paxton, he should not have waited until a few days before. We spent $80 million. That's money that we're going to wake up in September and October and say, geez, we don't have enough money. And he should have done everybody a favor and simply made his statement known and let people act accordingly. But what's going to happen is people are going to react to this. Some people are going to react to it. There was a column today in the Wall Street Journal that made this point. I thought it did, it was very artfully done and well researched and very thoughtful. I think I did a hell of a job with it myself. But I made the point of, some people are going to react to this by saying, boy, I need to, he was against Cornyn because Cornyn didn't say enough nice things early enough for him. So I better say, nice things, more. But some of them are going to say, you know what? It doesn't matter how loyal I am to him. It doesn't matter if I vote 99% of the time with him. So what the hell? Why don't I just do the right thing? And I think we're already seeing that in the two instances in the last week was he ain't going to get the $1 billion, including $220 million for the ballroom that, he told us it was going to be privately funded. Maybe by some people in this room, and he's not going to get support for. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out for the $1.8 billion to reward the J6 felons, and I think that's in part because I think members of Congress are saying, you know what, enough is enough, And, and he doesn't understand, too, that this is hurting him with the voters. You know, they're saying, really, you know, we're worried about, you know, $5 gas, and if you're in agriculture, $6 diesel, and you're talking about a ballroom. And, you know, we're worried about, you know, affordability, and you're sitting there saying it's peanuts, and talking about like, you know, like you're a New York real estate developer, which you were, about it's going to be the most beautiful ballroom you've ever seen. It's going to be great. People, George Washington wanted to have a ballroom here, but he didn't get, you know. I mean, it's just, and then it's, you know, he had another thing, a crazy thing to say today. Oh, the $250 bill with his picture on it. Please, that, I mean, if I'm a Democrat, I'm saying keep doing that shit. Really, keep doing it. Because the election this fall is going to be determined by turnout from each party's respective base. That's the biggest factor. But the second biggest factor is going to be how do independent-minded voters break in close contests, and none of this helps us.
So did word filter out to you in Amsterdam that James Tallarico no longer believes that God is non-binary?
Yeah, well, you know, smart move on his part. And more importantly, you know, basically, you know, I regret making comments about gender. I mean, yes, I'm not aware of, yes, and there are some people who biologically, their chromosomes are organized in a different way than X, Y, and yeah, okay, fine, great. But at least he understands the stuff that made him popular inside the confines of Travis County, you know, sort of little Moscow on the Colorado River, are not things that are going to sell well in Comanche or, you know, El Dorado or, you know, Tyler, you know, and he's, don't count on this guy being Robert Francis O'Rourke. O'Rourke went around for, you know, months in running against Cruz, saying crazy things, and was never called on him until September. This guy's smart enough to know, don't give him more ammunition.
So how do you rate the race? Is it you favor Paxton or a toss-up?
Well, look, we're still a Republican state, but like I put in my column, there's some warning signs. In his first race in 2014, of the 7 statewide candidates who were on the ballot that year, 8, he's right in the middle. But in 2018, when he runs for re-election, by then we've heard about the securities fraud and case and a couple of other things. He runs 177,000 votes on average behind every one of the candidates on the ballot that year. He is at the bottom of it. I mean, the land commissioner and the ag commissioner and the comptroller, everybody runs ahead of him, but the guys below him on the ballot run ahead of him. So people were already making a conscious decision, nearly 200,000 of them, I'm not voting for the guy. And then when he ran last time around, it was 154,000. And he's at the bottom of the ticket. Now he's going to be at the top of the ticket. And the Texas ballot, as you know, has the Senate and the congressional race are at the top, and then it's governor and the rest of the statewide officers. And it wasn't until 2023 that we started to hear about, you know, Nate Paul, the corrupt guy who gives his girlfriend a no-show job in Austin so that she can move there from San Antonio. So, and we even know, you know, he gives him the fake Uber account. So we now know how often he went to have sex with Laura Olson, because we got the record of him leaving his house at 8:33 p.m. and arriving back at 2 for her apartment and getting back at...
You haven't thought about this at all, have you?
Oh, no,
Carl?
no,
You haven't
look.
examined the record at all?
No, and look, Republican oppo research people are good. Democratic opposition research people are geniuses. Count on them having a, you know, I bet you a dime to a dollar that we have a June TV blitz going after corruption and look, he's got some vulnerabilities. Maybe they weren't intentional. I mean, count on it. You've heard about the guy in Waco, the lawyer in Waco, who abuses the best friend of his young son for years and gets caught. And the Attorney General of Texas has a special role in sex trafficking cases, and it's prosecuted by the office, by the Attorney General's office. And the guy gets, you know, the state recommends, the prosecutor recommends that the guy get time served, which is 1 day. And the judge says, no, I'm not going to accept that. This guy needs to go to jail. And it turns out his lawyer is the lawyer for the corrupt business guy, Nate Paul. Now, maybe that's just a coincidence, but you can bet the Democrats are going to be drawing a direct line saying the guy who gave you $200,000 of renovations and your girlfriend, my wife hates it when I say girlfriend. She says that's not a girlfriend. When, his mistress a job and does all, and for whom he does all kinds of favors, we're going to hear about Nate Paul from now till November. So how it plays out, you've got to give Paxton the advantage because we're the nature of the state, but they're going to come hot and heavy because we're the star. If they break Texas, they think they break the Republican hold on the White House.
So let's go to another state where it seems as though maybe a party has made an irrational choice for candidate, Maine, where Graham Plattner is going to be the Democratic nominee. I kind of wonder, though, whether he's really the weakest candidate for them, because Janet Mills, that played nationally as she's the moderate compared to Plattner, but she had a terrible record as governor, an 80-year-old white woman, whereas, Susan Collins isn't that old, but she's an older white lady herself, whereas this guy, he's fresh and new, obviously a poisonous toad in all sorts of ways. I mean, just the Reddit post alone should be disqualifying, but how do you think about that race?
Well, first of all, remember, Susan Collins never led in a single poll in her last race 6 years ago. She was opposed by a young, attractive Speaker of the House who was, outspent her and was a, progressive, but not as nutty as this guy. Susan never led in a single poll and beat her by 8 points. I would not count Susan Collins out. She's actually part of you've heard of the Illuminati, supposedly controls the world. It's actually the U.S. Senate Youth Program that controls the world, and Susan and I are both members of the U.S. We're both as 17 and 18-year-old kids sent to Washington, and that's the world global conspiracy. But no, and look, finally, they're starting to ask questions because not only does he have extreme views, but he's a poser. I only have a house because I got a VA loan. Well, it turns out the loan came from his dad, not the VA. And he says, I don't get paid by the company that I work for because it might affect my VA benefits. Well, his wife turns out to be getting paid by the company that he works with. So, I mean, as we go along, there's going to be something, and the Totenkopf, Nazi, 18 years, I wore it on my chest every single day, and I never bothered to say, just exactly what does this mean?
There's the old rumor about Secretary of State George Shultz having the Princeton tiger on his backside. It'd be like Shultz waking up, wait a minute, there's an animal back there?
Which incidentally he did. Yeah, Schultz was a pal of mine, and yes, he had a tiny little Princeton tiger, not on his derriere, but close to it. But anyway.
But it's amazing how this obviously.
Harlan, do you have a?
Anything we should know? Obviously,
Dan Branch does, but take it up with Branch afterwards.
This would be a national scandal if a Republican with such a tattoo, and it's not just a Nazi tattoo; it's like a really bad Nazi tattoo. But with him, it's kind of
it was the SS symbol.
Yeah, so with him, it kind of it's credibility. It proves he's different and
well, and look, the social media cuts both ways. We now know all these ugly things that he would said over the years, and we're going to have them repeated back. And Maine is a very peculiar state. I mean, it's a big state geographically, but the population is equivalent to 2 congressional districts. So basically part of the population of Austin, basically, 1 million plus, and they get to know people. And Susan is an authentic individual and crusty and independent-minded and has a great dog, which helped her win last time around. And poor dog's going to be rolled out again this election, I suspect.
The dog must be getting up there too, right?
Yeah, the dog is getting up there. So that is the one vulnerability I worry about. It's just simply, they say, what, she's done a great job, but she's, so she's going to have to show, energy level and run him into the grave.
So two other things in the midterm, real quick. Do you accept these, do you think this is correct? one, it seems really hard for Republicans to keep the House. Prior to the gerrymandering, they could only afford to lose like 3 net seats, and that seems very hard to keep that from happening. Now maybe they're +6 on the gerrymandering, but still a 9-seat cushion, probably not enough in a year like this. One, do you accept that? Two, let's assume that Collins loses, just for the sake of argument. Yeah. She goes down, North Carolina's lost to Republicans very likely, and assume Republicans don't pick anything else up anywhere else. Still, to get to a Senate majority, even in that situation, correct, Democrats would have to win 2 out of 4 of Texas, Ohio, Iowa, and Alaska, which seems an uphill battle.
Yeah, or 2 out of 5, because they're going to make a bid in Nebraska, because Nebraska is a relatively cheap state. And they've got this very smart state Democratic chairman who said, we've got an independent who came close last time around, so let's not have a real Democrat on the ballot so that they don't have the stink on them that Democrats have in Nebraska. But you're right, it's going to be tough for them. I mean, we can't take the Senate for granted, though, because they're going to have unlimited money. And particularly, they're going to be spending it in places to keep us on the defensive. I frankly think we got a good shot in Michigan. Mike Rogers came close last time around. The Democrat primary is late and it's bitter. And 2 of the candidates are, to my mind, left of center, far enough left of center that they might be unacceptable to what's left of the Reagan Democrats in the state.
So anyone who scares you on the Democratic side looking ahead to 2028, and who do you consider the front runner over there? Kamala Harris is leading in the polls. I assume that's name ID, but...
No, that's stupidity.
Yeah. But you think that you're just dismissive of that?
Yeah, I am. They're not going to nominate her. And look, I don't know who they're going to nominate. I'm better on who I don't think they're going to nominate. They're not going to nominate her because, look, she ran a terrible campaign and cared only about herself and, has done nothing to improve herself. I mean, if she really wanted to be a player in 2028, she should have run for governor of California, and we would all said, "Whoa, she's actually a pretty damn good candidate, and she's got a vision for the Golden State, and she gets into office and does things that are important and big." But no, I don't think they're going to nominate Gavin Newsom. The Democrats are not stupid enough to nominate Newsom or Pritzker, the governors of failed states. If they do, they'll lose. But I don't know who they're going to nominate. And the guy who's got the best message, but is a bad messenger, is Rahm Emanuel. I mean, it's like we got to be concerned. I mean, think about it. When we, virtually everybody in this room remembers, what was a Democrat 25 years ago, particularly a big city Democrat? It was the Catholic cop. It was the gal who worked as a nurse. It was a small business person. It was a Jew. It was, we knew what working class Democrats look like. They didn't graduate summa cum laude from Yale Law School and look down their nose at ordinary working people. They weren't, they were the middle of America. And that's not the Democratic Party anymore. At least it's not the leadership of the Democratic Party. And the question is, are they going to be able to get back to something like that? Are they going to be able to say, yeah, you're a tool pusher in the oil patch in New Mexico and you're Hispanic and we represent you? No, we're Latinx. We don't know what Tejano means. They got a real problem. I love all that. We're 5 months away from 2026, and we're already talking about 2028. And 2028 may seem like 2.5 years away. It is 3 geological ages. We got the Mesozoic, the Paleozoic, the Jurassic. I mean, there's going to be, and how these people perform is going to matter on both their side and our side in a way that it hasn't done before. Look, we knew who Bob Dole was. We knew who George W. Bush was. He hadn't been around long, but we thought we knew who Barack Obama was. We certainly knew who Joe Biden was. And we knew who Donald Trump was.
Joe Biden didn't know who Joe Biden was, though.
Yeah. I love his wife saying, "I thought he had a stroke." Yeah, really. He was that way every single day. Did you think he had a stroke every single day? But we're going to get to know these people, and you either get better or you don't. And how we view them today is, in all likelihood, not going to be the way that we view them for good or for ill. Remember, DeSantis beforehand? Everybody said, wow, this guy's going to be spectacular and blah, blah, blah. And he turned out to be nothing. I sort of got a hint of it. Harlan and several others in this room have been involved in helping the voter registration project that we've had in Texas for years, and we have a big conference to reward the donors. And so after DeSantis broke onto the scene, this had to be 2023, February of 2023, and we had him speak, and he was a reasonably good speaker, but in the green room in the back, we had all these billionaires come flying into Texas to sort of take a look at all the people who were thinking about running. And one of them was standing in the back room having a conversation with Ross Perot, and a little girl emerges from DeSantis's room, little holding room, and says, "Sir, Governor Santos would like to see you now." And the guy who's talking to Ross says, "Well, thanks, I'm having a conversation, I'll be there when I'm finished." I'm thinking, sort of weird. A couple minutes later, DeSantis peeks out of the door, glasses down on his nose, and barks at the guy, says, "Steve, I need to see you now." And I'm thinking, you're a supplicant, and you're treating a billionaire who can raise you a bunch of money and affect public opinion like he's your intern. And turned out that was emblematic of it.
Yeah, the hint I got, a friend of mine is in Florida and knows someone who went to high school with DeSantis and was on some Florida commission or something. So one day they're riding somewhere in a car together, 90 minutes from one city to the other, and they're going through wherever they grew up, and this guy said to DeSantis, "Oh, look, there's a Dairy Queen. A lot of us used to go there in high school." And DeSantis said, "I never went there." And that's the last thing he said in the whole car ride. A politician, But he's a hugely impressive guy and very, very knowledgeable.
And did a good job as governor.
Yeah, absolutely.
But doing a good job and being a good candidate are those are different abilities. Hopefully you have them both in the same person.
So let me circle back to the internecine fight within the right we were talking about at the beginning. So what is your rejoinder to the question that people on the new right ask, what has conservatism ever conserved? And the implication of this question is, last 40 or 50 years, we've just gone along to get along. We've gotten steamrolled by the left culturally, and we've never won anything big.
Geez, I thought we won the Cold War. I thought we took the economy of the 1970s that was double-digit inflation, double-digit interest rates, double-digit unemployment, and turned it into a roaring economy that's the model for the world. We are the people who have conserved the Constitution by appointing conservatives to the courts, particularly the Supreme Court, who've upheld the founding document and not engaged in these sort of nutty theories that, a judge is supposed to be there to be a political actor. We've kept America strong. We fought hard for traditional values. We protected the unborn. And my speech in Amsterdam, they asked me to talk about populism and what a mess we're in today. And one of the things that gets me is that we really are down as a country on ourselves at a moment when we have achieved so much. And not only here, but abroad. Largely because of America, life expectancy has doubled since 1900. And that's us. Because we're the ones who've, sort of with the Marshall Plan. I mean, think about it. Europe was on its back, and America came in and played an important role in reinvigorating it. Look at our economy.
Even just the last 15 years, Canada, Europe fallen further behind.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. Senator Graham's got a fantastic book on this. Our economy is so prosperous and creative and innovative, and it's because, look, we don't win every battle, but, we'd be content in this room, I suspect, if we had somebody as reasonably moderate representing the Democratic Party as Bill Clinton turned out to be. But the conservative, this idea of the new right is, again, populism is aggrievement. You got to be aggrieved about something, and you hate the people that are in. So they've got it, the new right. We had a new right before that was conservative, but this new right is populist, and as a result, it's got to say, you failed, and we didn't. We didn't win every battle, but we kept the country together and kept going in the right direction and preserved the essential nature of what it is to be a democracy and a government of limited power. And, you know, yeah, could we have done better? Yeah, but, you know, judge us by what we attempted to do and how much we succeeded, not by some perfect view. I mean, I hate to say this, I mean, this is going to sound weird. Doge, I was all in favor of Doge. You know, you need to do it. And it did succeed, but it was with a giant, you know, hammer rather than a scalpel. I'd never understood in the 2000 election why Al Gore didn't stand up and say, I led the effort that caused us for the first time since World War II to reduce the absolute number of federal government employees in the Reinventing Government initiative. Never understood why.
Instead he said he invented the internet.
Yeah, well, you know, yes, and what a marvelous thing he did, and we're grateful for it. But the point is that we're not, this idea that somehow or another the conservative movement has failed because we didn't achieve 100% of our goals and somebody's dissatisfied with the state of the country is ridiculous. In fact, we forced them to channel more of their energies in to things that were not connected with the federal government. Did DEI start with federal policy? No, it began with academia and private groups forcing companies to engage in this nutty process. And you know, okay, fine, let's go kill it.
So,
but do not blame the actions of the left on the conservative movement. We're going to be in constant struggle with them. They're, you know, when we win, they're going to try and do something. You know, and no victory is permanent.
so last thing, in the minute or two we have left, keeping
Actually,
on
you
this
got
theme.
46 seconds.
No, actually, we're over.
Oh, we're
You're
over.
misreading it. You're jet-lagged and misreading. We're over by 52 seconds. But I'm so generous as a moderator, Carl. I'll give you a little more time. So keeping on that theme, what is the one thing that makes you most optimistic about the future of America?
Americans. You know, think about it. We were not a country created by people who were the elite of abroad. Look back in your own history. We got the losers and the lightweights and the discards. And because of our system, because of our great founding documents, and because of the nature of what it is to be an American, we have become the most creative, innovative, compassionate, you know, significant presence on the face of the planet. You know, my great-grandfather was a Norwegian peasant. Literally second in his family. His father dies. The older brother gets the farm. I've been to the farm. It is the size of a soccer field. In fact, it is the municipal soccer field of Halden, Norway. He came to the United States in 1882, not speaking a word of English, knowing nobody here except a distant cousin in Devil's Lake, Wisconsin. He arrives in Wisconsin in the middle of the winter. He spends the first winter in America living in his cousin's barn. To keep himself occupied, he makes a little lift-top desk. By the spring, he's learned enough English to talk his way into getting work, does anything necessary. By the fall, talks his way into the University of Wisconsin. Look, no student aid, no family paying the tuition bills. He's slopping pigs, he's working the harvest, he's doing anything necessary, works his way through college, graduates from college, goes to law school, gets out of law school, marries a Swede, moves to Milwaukee, becomes a lawyer for Northwestern Mutual Life, and has a wonderful career for 40-some-odd years. And I had no idea until I went to the White House that in 1911, he is invited by the free country of Norway. Norway got its independence from Sweden in 1905. He is invited to become the first ambassador of Norway to the United States. I had no idea. But the Norwegian ambassador gave me copies of the letters, copies of the documents back and forth. His Majesty asks you to become the representative of Norway to the United States. What is required of me? You must remove yourself to Brooklyn, blah, 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 back and forth. The last letter is from Olaf Julius Rove to the foreign minister of Norway. It is with great regret that I must decline His Majesty's kind invitation. It would require me to give up my U.S. citizenship, a prize too dear. This guy was a loser. His entire life in Norway was going to be as a common farmhand, and he came to the United States and had a wonderful career, was named the Order of St. Olaf, Presidential Medal of Freedom of Norway for all that he did to help other immigrants. And his great-grandson worked in the White House. And I have the desk. I keep it in my living room so that I'm reminded every day that I am the beneficiary of one of the great accidents. I was born in America. And so all these people who say our greatness is over and we're blah, blah, and we've got to be bullshit. We're America, by God.
Ladies and gentlemen, Karl Rove, better than most well-rested speakers. Karl, we really, that was awesome. All right, so a few concluding remarks here before everyone runs out. First of all, I want to thank Erin Rappa and her team at NRI for putting this event on. I want to mention our sponsors again, the Apricity Foundation, Heiku Energy Group, James Bayless, Mr. and Mrs. Michael Brakey, Dale and Wendy Brott, Angel and Craig Fox, Brett Young, and the Peter and Judy Copps Foundation. Thanks again to Harlan and Kathy. If you're in the mood for traveling and you love this event, we're going to have another in Newport Beach, California on June 29th, and another one in Washington, D.C. on July 23rd. And by the way, we hope to see you at these other events, and hope you'll consider making a tax-deductible contribution to the National Review Institute. Always be closing, right, Karl? So Karl himself is a donor to National Review, which we deeply appreciate. And we're having the William F. Buckley Prize Dinner in New York City on October 29th, where we'll be honoring Steve Forbes and Joe Lonsdale with the Buckley Prizes this year. And immediately afterwards, we have a reception. We hope you'll all join us. And as was mentioned earlier by Senator Graham, that letter from John Adams saying that the future of the world depended on the future of America, that is still true. So we're so honored to be fighting shoulder by shoulder with all of you to preserve what makes this country great. God bless America. God bless all of you. See you down the road.